All right, it's 7 o'clock, as I've been informed. This is the Jamaica Selectboard for Monday, the 12th of November, 2018. Sorry. First order of business is to call for any late additions to the agenda. We're not going to have Judy tonight, she's tied up. So it's just us, anybody? Hearing none, let's move on to the approving the minutes of the October 22nd Select Board meeting. You all have them. Have you had the chance to look them over? Do you have any corrections, additions, or deletions to minutes? I have just a couple little ones.
No way.
Just little ones. Second paragraph, first page, second page. Greg Muehlman has spoken to Ace Goodman about repairs to stabilize the roof. I think that's supposed to be roof instead of rude. Probably. Yeah. And I mean, this is how good they've gotten. We're changing these real tiny little details. Third page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 paragraphs down. Andy made a motion not to collect electronics anymore. Secondary Paul. Motion did not carry. And then the last paragraph, the Jamaica Community Arts Council is putting on a haunted house. Tiny, little, tiny things that, considering all the other stuff that's been going on in the office, you did extremely well. I'm very proud.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from November, or from October 22nd with the changes recommended or proposed by Paul.
I'll second.
And a second, any further discussion? Hearing none, the minutes are accepted. Once again, with a very sincere thank you to Sarah. We didn't vote on them yet?
No.
Oh, just stickers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, whatever I just said. Thank you. Number 3, let's see, timesheets. Approve the timesheets for the town office, solicitors, highway, and transfer station. We'll do that at the end of the evening to protect you guys from being bored computers. Number 4, sign select board orders, same excuse. Number 5, we have a letter of resignation from a planning commission member. It was addressed to all of us, but it was sent straight to Rebecca. Oh, I saw Rebecca. Oh, there you are. Do you want to address that, or do you want me to?
You can address that.
We had a member who was on the planning commission, Lisa Mann, sent us a letter in Tuesday, October 23rd. Regretfully, I'm resigning from the Jamaica Planning Commission. So part of what we have to do tonight, which is item number 6, with Rebecca's assistance, is talk about a new member for the Planning Commission and volunteers for the alternates for the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So this sort of bleeds us right into number 6. We accept Lisa's resignation with regret. Thank you very much, and I would like to turn this then to you, since this is really your area of expertise.
I would like the select board to post a notice calling for volunteers for the 5th position for the planning commission. We've got a lot of work on our plate, and the more talent that we have to draw from, the better it is, and the more quickly and efficiently that we can do our work. Also, as the Zoning Board of Adjustment has been getting itself organized and meeting, we're establishing rules of procedure that have been recommended by the Vermont Planning the Information Center. It's a state effort to help local planning commissions, who are all non-professionals, do their work well. And one of the things that they recommend in their rules of procedure is to have 2 alternate members on the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Reason being, in a small town like this, it is almost inevitable at some point that a Zoning Board of Adjustment member may have conflict with a proposal that has come before the board. So there needs to be 2 people at least that we can call on to fill in case that happens.
I think it's a good idea. I dawned on me halfway through that I forgot to ask you to identify yourself for the camera, although we know who you are, just for the record.
Rebecca, Chair of the Planning Commission.
Thank you. So that's where we are. We need to post that. We can ask Sarah to do that, Gonna put a post for the new one.
So the zoning board of adjustments does not need to be on the planning commission?
No.
They don't. It's a separate entity.
Absolutely not. It can be, has happened that the appointed members of the ZBA now are also appointed members of the planning commission, but that's not absolutely necessary. But it happens pretty frequently in very small towns that you have a limited pool of people who are willing to serve in that capacity.
Should we therefore make 2 separate requests?
Well, yeah, if we only have one alternate that comes forward in the next
Sure.
month.
No,
so-
I meant to say a separate one for the zoning board and the people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Separate, so,
absolutely.
yeah,
They're
that
two-
was-
That was my.
Right,
So it's a
exactly.
separate
Sorry,
position.
I was-
Are they overlap? They can overlap, but they're not necessarily overlapping.
Exactly, and it is two completely separate boards.
Okay, so we'll
yes.
solicit independently.
Absolutely.
It's
That's 2 separate pieces of paper.
And then these 2 are in addition to the third one that would be filled by the new member of the planning commission.
Right now, there are 4 members of the ZBA. We can have up to 5. I think Jamaica has traditionally had 5. You could change it and make it 3. According to the law, there has to be at least 3.
But in answer to your question, as we select, if we appoint another PC member, we'd also
Still
then-
want 2 additional alternates
Yes,
We need 2
Yes,
alternates, but in
absolutely.
addition
to
to the
the.
5th.
right.
Yeah, we still need to appoint, if we appoint.
We're
it to
looking
the
for
planning
3 people.
commission, We need 3 human beings.
Right.
Yes, 3 human beings.
I would say though that to serve as an alternate on the ZBA would be much less of a time commitment than to be a full member of the planning commission. So it would only be in the case when there's a conflict and one of the ZBA members has to recuse themselves.
So this would be a good position for somebody who's interested in participating in the community and volunteering some time, but doesn't have the time commitment for a full position on the planning commission.
Absolutely.
Good.
And we are in the process of creating our rules of procedure and establishing a timeline of things, so when things do come up, so that people who come after us will have all of this information
Sure.
at their fingertips when they start on the board, and we're thinking that that will help encourage more people to serve, actually, if it doesn't have to be such a huge learning curve at the very beginning.
I-
So we're
I-
trying very hard to do that.
I had an opportunity to look over the stuff you produced, and I think you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks to the rest of your crew there.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're
I've
doing
been
good work.
doing hard work.
Any other questions for this particular topic? And you can, you do that for us. Thank you. Number 7. Historically, well, let's go back a little bit. We've been talking about the structure that's ultimately been called the Chair Factory, the Cheney Mill, the old Cheney Mill. There's another name that was thrown out.
It's,
So, another name. Lots of names.
Jocelyn,
Right.
Jocelyn family owned it, yeah. Felsen family owned it.
It's got a history to it, actually, which
Yes.
is why you all are interested in
Yes.
it. Let's just, for the sake of argument, start calling it the Cheney Mill.
Okay.
So
So
the
part,
sign on it says.
part of the, they got a sign on it. Did you put that sign on?
No, that magically appeared. I don't know how.
Yeah, it says, I was surprised.
And I don't even think it was from someone from Jamaica,
Really?
actually.
Anyhow, so at any rate, we discussed, as we discussed last night, that we're gonna go ahead and see if we can get this thing in gear. That's gonna be a huge project. Any way you look at it, we're talking a couple of years minimum to get all the things that need to be done. I mean, it's gonna be financing done, just lots and lots of things.
Yes.
So it's a far bigger project than any one or 2 individuals or even a small group. So I'm proposing that we have a committee, and I've talked to Greg since he's armpit deep in this project anyway, if he'd be on that committee, and then a committee of citizens who are interested in this, and we can divide up the different things that need to be done so that nobody is burned out
Yes.
and we maintain some semblance of energy over the long period of time. And so what we're going to do then is we're going to ask members of the community to get in touch with the town clerk. Just leave us your name and phone number if you're interested in this. This goes for everybody, not just the people sitting here. And we will construct a committee of interested people. And if you have a specific interest in grant writing, for example, or the permit process, for example. Those other kinds of things that are going, and there's going to be stuff that's going to come up that we haven't thought about yet. And so we need a fairly strong contingent of folk who've got energy, time, and not necessarily expertise, because most of what we do around here is a learning. Sometimes we learn, but on the job training. But we certainly use time and energy, and I think those are the two major commitments. But if you've got expertise, that's even better. So I see some nodding in the audience, and Greg, you're willing to be the select board's connection to that. Any other select board members want to be on it? Everybody's so busy here, it's hard to decide exactly where, but I figured you're already doing it, most of it. So that helps, if that works for you.
Glad to.
Okay, excellent. So what we'll do is we'll solicit for that as well. And as I said, anybody who has any interest, energy, and perhaps some expertise are welcome to get in touch with us, and we'll put a committee together and get moving on that. It's going to be a slow process, but the potential of producing something of value, taking a liability and making it into an asset, I think is there. It's just going to take some time and energy. And there are going to be some problems to overcome. There's things like, floodplain, money, little things. So we will attempt to attack that in small bites so that we don't choke on it and give up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Works for you guys? Any other questions? So, do we need to, yes,
Excuse me. We did get approved for the condition assessment grant. And the Preservation Trust of Vermont is in the process of assigning us a contractor to do that.
excellent.
And this process takes about 2 to 3 months total.
Okay. Excellent. And then you'll share us the results of that?
Yes.
And they can do that during the winter?
Apparently, she's working on, Jenna Lepichinsky is working on that as fast as possible
Okay.
to hopefully happen before the winter.
Good luck. I'm looking at tomorrow night.
Well, yes, she's gone through a couple of contractors already and they're very busy right now. So,
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, so.
Greg, what's the status of the roof repair last week?
Basically,
That hadn't happened yet.
Asa's still trying to juggle stuff, but assures me that he's gonna get it done before winter, and I guess whose ever definition that is.
So he's doing it right now?
So he's out there now.
December 21st.
Yeah, the official
Yeah,
start of winter.
we
Yeah,
understand.
I think everybody's anxious, and I know he recognizes that, and he's got a lot of other anxious people, I'm sure, too.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. So the question is about, do we as a group need to make pass a motion or resolution for this committee, or can we just go into the thoughts?
We can make a motion to
Create the committee?
create the committee and appoint Greg. I'll make the motion to create the Cheney Mill committee. And should we do one motion and appoint Greg as the select board representative to that committee?
Sure, I like that idea. Do you have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, sure, second away.
Yeah, unless somebody else wants to say, not second. Thought there might be a conflict there.
There may be, but no, we're friends.
No conflict.
No conflict. We'll apologize for the morning. All in favor? Say,
Discussion.
got a motion, we got a second. Any further discussion? No. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. Thank you, sir. And the way this works out is probably you're going to be moving to the same thing you're doing anyhow. So it's just giving you a title, and then you can put a little badge on the guy.
Make decisions.
Make
Cheney
decisions.
Mill's ahead.
We'll let those guys do
Cheney
it.
Mill bench. The next order of business tonight is the presentation by the engineers of the Jamaica Water Feasibility Study results. Oh, here it is. Back, and I don't, I honestly don't remember when. Chrissy, when did we start this? 6 months ago? A while
It's
ago.
longer than that.
In the spring? Last winter? At any rate, the town has been discussing the potential for town water, sewage, a bunch of things. And one of the things we needed to do before we started looking into creating stuff is to determine the need for the potential creation of different stuff. And the funding and all that stuff has all been held in abeyance pending the results of a study conducted by Dufresne Company Corp. What do you call yourselves? Group. Dufresne Group. And Chrissy, who is not only a Jamaica resident, but also the engineer who's doing this sort of stuff, is here this evening to tell us about it. Hi.
Hi.
You're on.
Hi.
Christine.
Chrissy Haskins with Dufresne Group Consulting Engineers. So I brought some handouts for the folks in the audience here who have not seen the report. And all the board members have that. The table is the exact same table that's in the report. And then on the back side, there's some Q&A. So we'll just do a quick summary of the report. So just to remind everybody, this was a report to evaluate the existing conditions, evaluate what the situation is here now, identify any deficiencies, and make recommendations for a next phase if necessary. The first thing we did was identify a study area. So the study area was along Route 30 from Water Street to and including Three Mountain Inn. And the reason it stopped there is because beyond that, the density isn't quite as much as the development's not quite as dense. So if there were water sewer issues there, the property owners down that way would likely have more space for replacements versus right here in the center of town. The reason we included the Three Mountain Inn is because they used to be a public water system. They are not currently a public water system, but they were. And the state likes consolidation of public water systems, so we included them in the study. On Pikes Falls Road from Route 30 down to 191, I believe. And then all of Factory Street, all of Water Street, and Depot Street from Route 30 all the way out to the school, again for the same reason, the school is a public water system, so that's why we went that far out. And so we did a survey of the study area. So the properties in the study area received a paper survey, and I brought a copy with me in case anybody wanted to see what it looked like. There was a question about it in some of the survey responses. Let's see, where is it? There it is. So out of the surveys, we sent out 63 surveys, and we got 29 back. So that is a 46% response rate, which is pretty good. And then we also had, so that paper survey was pretty in-depth. It was a 2-page survey that asks questions about the building, the size of the building, the use of the building, what the water source was, any issues with the water source, and then same thing with wastewater, what the wastewater disposal is, any issues with it. And then there were a couple opinion type questions on the survey. We also did an online survey with just the opinion questions on it, because we didn't need all the other water and wastewater from the folks outside the study area. There were 49 participants in the online survey. So in the study area, there were 63 developed parcels, meaning that they contained habitable structures. We looked at the approximate parcel size, and just for reference, 87% of the parcels in the study area were less than 1 acre, 67% were less than a half an acre, and 32% were less than a quarter acre. So pretty small parcel sizes here. And that's typical of villages throughout Vermont, densely populated villages. So in the study area, there are 4 public water supplies, 3 of which are not currently public water supplies. The Jamaica Village School is an active public water supply, and that one is called a non-transient, non-community water supply, meaning that it's the same people every day. It serves the same people. The other three were the Three Mountain Inn, which is currently listed as inactive and it's non-public now. It's been changed to a non-public water supply because they don't meet the threshold anymore of being a, what's called a transient non-community water supply, which means they serve different people. So that's restaurants, inns, things of that nature. So they don't meet the population threshold anymore to be a transient non-community water system. So they're currently non-public, and their public status is inactive. The Jamaica House, same situation. It is currently considered non-public and inactive. And then the Astas, the old Astas water supply is currently listed as a transient non-community water system, but it is inactive due to non-use right now. So those are the 4 public water supplies. And then we had, we put together a map of so this was the figure 1.2 in the report, for anybody that can pass this around. So this map shows all of the wells, not all of the wells, it shows all the wells that we could map. So some of them, this is a different one. So we couldn't map all of the wells because the survey response wasn't 100%. And the state's data for well mapping is not 100%. So we mapped as many as we could using the surveys, the state's data, and also that 2000 study that was done. There was some data in there that we didn't have on this round, so we used some of that as well. So that shows location of wells in relation to floodplains, wetlands, there are no wetlands in the village, but floodplains, surface water streams, roads. It's on an ortho photo, so it shows roads and buildings and all of that, those items. And there are some wells in the floodplains, which is okay for private wells, but not preferred. Prefer to keep them out of the floodplain. It is actually not allowed for any public wells. They cannot be located in the floodplain. Other than that, in regard to natural features, there wasn't any other issues. We summarized in the report the 2 different rules governing water supplies. So there's the Vermont wastewater and potable water supply rule. That mostly governs the private residential wells. And then you have the water supply rule, which governs the public wells. And some non-public but permitted wells. Just to make it confusing. So they have different isolation distances, and that was the key thing for the rules, is looking at the isolation distances for the wells. So a drilled well in a drilled residential well has to be anywhere a minimum of 100 feet from a leach field, but depending on topography, could require to be up to 400 feet from a leach field. If it's a gravel packed well or a shallow well or spring, it has to be 150 feet minimum. When we go to public water supplies, you have to be 100 feet minimum. And that all depends on how much water is being taken out of the public water supply and how much wastewater is being put into the adjacent wastewater system. When it comes to residential wells, there are variances allowed. So the state, if you had to replace a septic system or if you had to replace a well and you don't have space to do that, the state will work with you to do a best fit design that will allow you to continue to use the property while maintaining a high level of protection for human health. Under the water supply rule for public wells, there are no variances when it comes to isolation distances. So if you don't have that 100 feet, they will not permit a public well. You can use it for residential, but it will not be permitted as public. And there is no way around that. Right. So one important thing to note is pretty much most commercial uses nowadays, commercial uses that serve the public, need to be permitted as public water systems. That's under the current rule. But the state does allow For property to remain in active use regardless of compliance with the current laws, current rules, at the use and scale that existed back in 2007. So whatever that use and size, so if you served, if you had 10 seats for breakfast in 2007, you can continue to have that in perpetuity with your current water supply, as long as, even if your water supply doesn't meet the current regulations. The second you want the 11th seat, that changes everything, and now you need to meet all the current rules. So it does not allow for any changes, does not allow for any expansion. Under water quality, I'm just doing a really quick summary of this.
That's fine.
Under water quality, we asked in the survey, how many people do any sort of treatment on their residential well? Well, actually, it could be any commercial or residential. Anybody any treatment in the study area. So the total, out of the total responses, so what do we have, 20 something responses, 29 responses. So out of that, 16 of them were providing treatment. So that's 50% of the respondents were providing some sort of treatment. Mostly filters, some sort of filter type. Some people had multiple filters. There's one UV disinfection and a couple softeners. So that's more than I expected. But when we look at the water quality results, there is high iron and manganese kind of throughout the village. And so that's a good reason why people are using filters. Iron and manganese have taste and odor and color. They're aesthetic contaminants, so that's taste, odor, color. So most people want all of that stuff out of their water. And that's something that's pretty obvious. If you have iron and manganese, you know it. And you're probably going to be filtering your water. Manganese. And actually there was quite a few respondents that actually do test their water or have tested their water in the past. There was a few people that noted that it tested after Irene and did have total coliform or other contaminants in their well after that, and were able to clean it out and get back to good water quality. Nothing major was found in any of that. Like I said, iron and manganese was probably the biggest thing in the testing that was done by individual property owners. For the study, we did do some water testing, and we actually were able to do more water testing than originally anticipated because of the Department of Health study that was going on at the same time. We got to get our testing done under that. So they tested for total coliform, E. coli, arsenic, chloride, copper, fluoride, iron, lead, manganese, nitrate and nitrite, sodium, hardness, gross alpha, and uranium. And there is a description of the source of those contaminants in the report for anybody who's interested in that. A lot of them are erosion of natural deposits. They're things that naturally occur in the water. The good news was there was no positive hits for E. coli. There were 4 positive tests for total coliform, which is an indicator of some sort of contamination. It's not harmful to your health, but it is an indicator that there is some sort of contamination. There could be a problem with the way the well is sealed. There could be a problem with a leak in the piping, something of that nature. And usually, I know in most cases they recommend disinfecting the well, and that usually takes care of it. So out of all of these results, the biggest one, there was one, so there was a few properties, there was 11 properties tested. A few of them did have manganese, and one of them did have manganese above the Vermont Health Advisory level. So there's a couple different levels that we look at. There's the maximum contaminant level, which is the MCL. That is a health level. So that's primary contaminants. Those are things that are going to be harmful to your health. And these levels are set by the EPA. Then there's a secondary maximum contaminant level. That's for the aesthetic contaminants. That's the stuff that's gonna make your water look dirty or taste bad or smell bad, but it's not harmful to your health. And then Vermont actually has their own health advisory levels for certain contaminants, and manganese is one of them. And so there was one property that was above that health advisory level for manganese. And then there was a couple properties that were up, let's see, they were exceeding the secondary maximum contaminant level for iron. So that ties, that correlates to what we've seen, what we saw on the property owner responses for their water testing. And then there was a couple tests that were high on gross alpha, which is radionuclides in the water. And that is a health contaminant. That's one that you don't want in your water at all. So they're not over the limit, but they were approaching the limit. So in all of these cases, the property owners were notified by the Department of Health of what their results were and what the recommendations were on what they should do for their water quality. But nothing really major showed up on the water quality. So then we asked what property owners pay for maintenance annually for their water. And 86% of respondents said $0 to $300 a year. So annual costs are your electricity to run your pump. I'm not sure if people factor that in, but that's what an annual cost. For people who have filters or some sort of treatment, it's maintaining your treatment, filter cartridges, salt for your softener, things like that. One thing that people don't typically think of is the long-term costs of, a well pump replacement, drilling a new well, dealing with some sort of severe contamination. These are all long-term costs that pretty much everybody's going to have to replace a well pump at some point. So really that should be factored into your annual cost, but most people don't do that. But the reason that's important to look at all of these different costs is when you look at the costs, and that's one of the big questions, is what is a water system going to cost people? What is that annual cost going to be? So the state, when they do their affordability calculations, when you apply for funding, they look at affordability. So they look at your median household income of the town. And the state, so there's two different numbers. The state uses 1% of the median household income. So based on the state's, they use the American Community Survey, and the most recent data from that is $56,719 for median household income here. So the state would say that 1% of that is a reasonable cost for affordability of water for a year. So that's $567 a year.
Can I ask a good question?
Yes.
Does that figure include second homes or just primary residences?
The median household income, I believe, is just primary residence. I can double check, but I'm pretty sure it's just primary. Rural development, which is another funding source, they're the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, rural development. They also provide funding for water systems, and when they do affordability calculations, they use 1.5%, which would actually be $850 a year. So that is what the state and the federal government think is reasonable for the cost of water. And when you break those down, I've been to a few seminars lately where they've been talking about the cost of water, and when you break it down per gallon, how much it actually costs per gallon, it's less than a penny of gallons that you're using a year. So it's not a lot of money. It sounds high when you look at it for the year, but when you look at how much water you would use, it's not that high. So based on what the respondents were saying is $0 to $300, that's pretty low for a water cost. So that's on the lower end. Not to say that that's unrealistic or anything. That's completely realistic. It could certainly be $0 to $300. But just to give an idea of what the state thinks is reasonable and what some other systems are paying in the state. There are a lot of systems that are paying around that much. Some that pay less, some that pay way more. So we did an evaluation of water usage. Now, when we look at this for municipal water systems, there's metered data. So we have a pretty good idea of what people are using. Here, we don't have metered data. So we estimated based on the state's design demands. So the water supply rule and the wastewater rule both have design demand tables in them that you have to use when you permit anything. So we used that, and based on the current residential and commercial use, we came up with about 32,500 gallons per day is what the study area is using. And then we projected that out using a population projection. Projecting from 2018 to 2040, the population is projected to increase 10.3%, and that's based on historic population trends. I think we went back to 1940 for that. So when we add in that population projection, the increase is about 4,000 gallons per day. And then when we look at the increase of residential commercial development, the possibility for residential and commercial development increases, there's some vacant buildings. We estimated about 5 right here on Depot Street that are vacant. There's several others for sale. There's no way to know what those buildings will be used for in the future, so it's kind of hard to say how much water they'll use. So we went back to what the previous use of the building was and just estimated at that. So that added another 4,500 gallons, which brought us up to a projected average water usage in 2040 of 41,000 gallons per day. So 32,500 to 41,000. The reason we did that was to look at how that compares to the capacity available right now. So if we were to stay in the current situation and use the current wells and not add any more, just use what's already here, how does that compare? So unfortunately, when we did look at that, there was no yield, well yield data. So the data that tells us how much water is coming out of each well or how much water can come out of each well, which is tested by the well driller. There was no data for about 75% of the study area, which is not uncommon. A lot of older wells don't have the data reported. Nowadays, all the well reports are sent to the state, and the state has that all in a database. That didn't happen years ago, so a lot of that stuff is missing. So with a majority of the study area data missing in that item, we couldn't really put a number on how much is available for capacity without further investigation. So we really couldn't compare what the future use would, projected use versus capacity would be. I already talked about that. Then we looked at impact on economic development and property values. We went through the town plan and identified a lot of goals and policies in the town plan that support economic development, that support increased infrastructure. On the survey questions, and so these are questions that went out to both the paper survey respondents and the online survey. We asked, do you think a water system is desirable? And out of the responses received, 34% of the respondents said yes, 30% said no, 16% said not sure, and 20% wanted to see what the study said. So when you add the last two together, it's really a third of the people said yes, a third said no, and a third said I don't know. We also asked if a public water system was constructed, then this was only on the online survey. This did not go to the paper survey people because those properties are within the study area, meaning they would probably be connected to a water system if one were to be installed. Not guaranteed, but it would be likely. So this went to the online survey, so those people are non-users. So they would likely not be connected to the system. Again, not a guarantee, but likely not connected. So if a public water system was constructed, would you as a non-user be willing to pay an annual fee that would be used to help the system users pay for construction? And the response there, yes was 12%, no was 72%, and not sure was 16%. So a majority of the respondents said that no, they would not want to pay for the construction of the system or any fee for the system. And there were some comments that were added. We had a box for comments to be added in. And there was several people who noted that they have their own well, their own septic to maintain, and nobody's helping them pay for that. So that was kind of the reasoning behind that large no percentage. And one thing I just wanted to go back to was on that isolation distance topic, we did prepare a map that shows all of the wells that we could map with the minimum isolation distance of 100 feet. We didn't actually go through and look at topography and do the real isolation distances, but just looking at 100 feet, we also added in all of the septic systems that we could map based on the current survey and the 2000 survey, and anything we could find in the wastewater permit database. So just to share that with everybody, you can see the hatching there represents the isolation distances, and so you can see a lot of properties have wells that are within, or septic systems that are within their well isolation distance, or their neighbor's septic system is within the isolation distance.
Is this report online?
I don't think, it's not online yet, but I'm sure it will be. So it's about 60% of the wells on that map have septic systems within that 100-foot isolation distance.
It seemed higher than that when I was looking at it. Like there was like maybe 5, 3 or 4 maybe that weren't.
Yeah, I counted them up, and if it was kind of on the very, very edge, I figured the state would say.
All right.
You probably let it slide, but and that's only the ones we can map. There's certainly more septic systems than that, and there's more wells than that. So another one of the opinion questions that was asked was, do you think a public water system will increase economic development in the village? The responses to that were 47% yes, 34% no, and 19% not sure. And this is pretty much what we expected out of that. There's a pretty good split as to whether or not, as to people who support economic development versus not. And so that was pretty similar to what we expected there. We did talk to Wyndham Regional. Chris Campany, who's the director of Wyndham Regional, he has spoken many times about this topic, and so we asked him for his comments, and those are actually right in the report. I just copied that right in there, exactly what he said. Basically, he notes that village businesses not only provide goods and services to residents and travelers, they're community gathering places. Reliance upon private wells and on-site wastewater systems can pose serious problems for the retention of existing businesses and certainly for business expansion or new businesses. It can also pose challenge for sale of businesses and commercial buildings. He talks about that 2007 cutoff where commercial development is basically just frozen in time. If you have a well that doesn't meet current standards for public water system, you're stuck where you were in 2007. So he talks about that a little bit. Businesses are frozen in time. They can't significantly deviate from the use that was in existence more than a decade ago. They cannot grow and evolve. Potential buyers may be dissuaded. And he finishes up by saying water and wastewater constraints may not be the cause of business closure or discontinuance, but it can be a significant contributing factor. So I know he's a big supporter of public water for economic development. And that's a big part of economic development. We also talked to real estate agents. They have a good idea of how public water might affect property values. So we talked to some realtors that work in areas, well, in this area, but work in with real estate in areas that are served by a public water system versus not. So the Stratton area is served by a public water system. Manchester is served. Chester. So these are some adjacent areas that are served by public water systems. And the consensus from the realtors was that public water system would increase property values. It eliminates the issue of contaminated water, as public water systems are required to test for various water quality parameters on a regular schedule. This was something I did not know. One of the agents, realtors that we talked to noted that some mortgage companies will not approve a mortgage if the minimum isolation distances for a well and or septic are not met, even if the well and septic are both in good working order and the well has good water quality. If the isolation distance is not met, some mortgage companies will not approve the mortgage. And they also noted that shared water and wastewater systems can be a negative to buyers, as shared systems often do not have maintenance agreements, which can lead to financial and legal issues. So, with all of that being said, the big question, the primary question that kind of triggered all of this was, does the village need a public water system? And I don't have a definite answer for you.
No, let's start over.
What I do have is a conditional answer. If the town wants to see economic development and growth in the village, then yes, you need a public water system. If you don't want to see that, then it's probably fine the way it is. If you just want it to stay the way, you know, no growth, no new businesses, no business growth, then the village, I'm sure, could keep going the way it is on the wells they have. There may be some issues or difficulties in the future for replacing septic systems, but like I said before, the state doesn't want to kick anybody out of their building, and the wastewater program really does work with people to maintain the current use of their building. You can't expand that use. You know, if you have a failed septic system, you need to replace it, and you're not going to meet the rules. They'll work with you and they'll do a best fit, but you can't do any sort of expansion there. So it's definitely clear from the survey responses there are varying opinions on the vision for growth in the village. The town plan does support economic and community growth. So the need for a public water system really largely depends on what the town's vision is for the village in the next 5 years, 10 years, and beyond that. We'll finally get to that table on that handout. This is a summary of concerns for potable water in the future, if the town's goal is growth. If the town desires to have economic and community growth, well isolation distances, you have private and public. We already know that private wells a lot of private wells, we say at least 60% of the private wells do not meet current isolation distance requirements from a septic system. Public wells, the only active one is the school, and that one does meet it. It has to meet all the isolation distances. But it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to permit a public well anywhere in the more densely populated area, the more densely developed area. Bacterial contamination, we didn't see any major issues there, some total coliform hits, but that can be easily addressed, and any sources of contamination for the coliform could be repaired to prevent E. coli contamination. Chemical and mineral contamination, there's definitely some iron and manganese issues. That what we see is the iron and manganese issues can just continuously get worse. When you're pumping water out of the ground, the longer you pump for, the more water you pump, the further away it's coming from. And a lot of times that just degrades the water quality. We've seen it in some other wells where they didn't have any iron and manganese issues to begin with, and now they have severe iron and manganese issues after years of pumping water. Maintenance costs, the respondents reporting spending less than $300 on maintenance. That likely doesn't account for replacement cost of a well or a pump, but it is a reasonable cost, and it is on the low side of what the state says is affordable. The capacity of the existing wells, that's unknown without any further investigation. The ability to support economic growth. So that we labeled as deficient. Because of the public water issue, you can't get permits for a public water supply with isolation distance issues. So a lot of commercial uses will require a public water supply moving forward. So any new commercial uses or expanded commercial uses will require that. And it's just not possible to do in most parts of the study area. And then the ability to support existing businesses. So as long as they don't want to grow at all, then what we have certainly can support them right now. But if there is going to be any sort of growth or any sort of change, that is not supported for the same reasons as economic growth. So I'll just run through some of these questions. These questions were developed based on comments that we received. These are not word for word questions that came in on the studies, but based on all of the comments and questions we received in that comment box on the study, on the surveys, I kind of took all of those comments and questions and paraphrased them into these, which seem to be a common theme questions. So the first one, this was actually only received from one respondent, but I did want to address it. Why didn't the residents outside the study area receive paper surveys? It was noted that it might not be fair to have only an online survey for those folks because maybe some people don't have access or they didn't know about it. The paper survey, like I noted before, was a pretty in-depth questionnaire that went out to the study area, but we didn't need all of this information from everybody else. And it would have been pretty costly to send paper surveys to every property owner in the town of Jamaica, which would have taken away, that cost of producing and mailing would have taken away from the effort put into the study. So I just wanted to explain that quick. So why would property owners with no water issues want to pay for water? So the easy answer to that is everybody does pay for water. You may not be paying a water bill, but you are paying for your water. You're paying for your electricity, somebody paid for the well. You pay for treatment potentially. Eventually you pay for a well pump replacement. So the benefit to a community water system is that your private costs go away. You no longer have a well. You pay your water fee, and all of the maintenance is done for you. You don't have to worry about it. It's all included in your fee. You don't have to worry about any maintenance. You don't have to worry about replacement costs. It's all included in your user fee. And then there's also monthly, quarterly, and annual water quality testing for a variety of contaminants that most people probably aren't testing for on their own. So ideally, it's going to be improved water quality. What happened to the last study? So the last study was done in 2000, so almost 20 years ago, and it really focused on septic systems. And so this study focuses on water, drinking water. Why study a water system instead of a wastewater system? So this is a question that's come up in the public meeting previously, and it did come up again in the survey responses. So a public water system would eliminate the need for private wells. That also eliminates the isolation distances around all those wells. So when you take away all of that, that frees up more space for replacement septics and decentralized wastewater systems. And the public water system would allow for economic growth by eliminating the issues associated with permitting a public water supply. So if you put in a wastewater system instead of a water system, you wouldn't be freeing up all that space for wastewater, for decentralized wastewater, and you wouldn't be dealing with the public water system issue. You would still have that public water system issue. Why not install both water and wastewater? That could certainly be done at the same time, was the comment. It was in reference to only ripping up the roads once. If you're going to do it, just do it once. So that certainly could be done if that was what the community desired. Would the water be fluoridated? So this was something that was done, I think more in the 80s and 90s. Water systems added fluoride to the water to help with people's teeth. Now fluoride is more readily available. It's in toothpaste and everything. So most water systems actually do not add fluoride. I only know of one that does. And that would really be a community or user decision. It's not something that's required by the state. Nobody's going to make a water system add fluoride. There is the potential of naturally occurring fluoride, but that's pretty low. So now the big question, what is the cost of a public water system? And another question going along with that was what is an estimated annual fee? And I think that was more in relation to the question about non-users. What would be the estimated annual fee? So without knowing what the water source might be and where it might be, we can't answer that question. We can't answer either question. The steps required to answer the question of cost is source exploration and a preliminary engineering report. That will get you an estimate of what the total project cost will be, the construction cost, the source development cost, engineering, legal, administrative, all of that stuff's all included in an estimate. And the preliminary engineering report actually requires a cost estimate to be included. So at that point, that report would answer all of these questions. It would provide the source exploration to know where the source is going to be and what it's going to be. It would provide water quality testing to know what kind of treatment might be required, or if any at all. It would tell us how much transmission main would be needed, how much distribution piping would be needed. It would identify a service area, so how many services would there be, how many property owners would be paying for it. So that gets you to how much would it cost a property owner. You need all of that information to get to that point. And on the estimated annual fee for non-users, that is not a typical cost. Typically, non-users don't pay for a water system. I think there's only one in the state of Vermont that does. There's only one water system in the state of Vermont that does that. So what is the service area? Again, without that preliminary engineering report, we don't know. The service area would be developed as part of that. It would be based on hydraulics, depending on where the well is located, assuming it was a well, depending on topography. It could consider physical barriers, maybe the stream and the rivers are physical barriers. You can cross them, but oftentimes they tend to be barriers, at least for a phase one type of construction. Development density might also be a factor in that. Is it possible to create a district for a water system? So I think we've talked briefly about this in the past. Yes, a fire district could be created. This is a quasi-municipal entity. Often it is created by the town. And it would basically encompass the service area of the water system. One benefit to a fire district is that only the people within the fire district would vote on those items. So the budget of it, that would be done by the voters of the fire district. Whereas if it's a town water system, the entire town votes whether or not they're connected. So you want to, there's a vote to spend $1 million on a water main extension or upgrade. You've got the entire town voting on that, even though they don't pay for it. Whereas a fire district, only the people that are users are paying, are voting on those topics. And then funding options. So funding for source exploration, for planning, for final design is available through a 0% interest loan through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. There also may be small grants available from the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development for planning. These are more, $10,000, $20,000 grants. But they were at a workshop I went to not too long ago, and they did say that their grants could be used for this type of planning. For construction, currently the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund does not fund the construction of new water systems, but USDA Rural Development does. So there is a loan/grant program through USDA. The grants are awarded based on affordability. So they look at the median household income and they look at what your, in this case, projected user rate would be, and they determine if you need grant money to bring your rate down. So those are some funding options. That's not to say there aren't potentially other funding options, but those are the typical funding options. And I did speak with Lynette, so she was here. Lynette Claudon. She's from the State Facilities Engineering Division. She was here to talk about the funding available for wastewater a while back. And she noted that the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is available to support the town in any questions or discussions they might want to have, or even public meetings on economic growth and what may help economic growth, related to a water system or wastewater. And also RCAP, and I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a group that has, they did the water sampling. The guy actually came down and actually did the sampling for the water study. So they work very closely with the state and with the funding agencies and can provide some of that support during the planning, during kind of that non-engineering planning, the more community development type planning. And then also Wyndham Regional is available for support as well. And Chris Campany, I'm sure, would be happy to come and talk, in a public meeting about all of this. So Lynette just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that the state is, and the state agencies and Wyndham Regional are available to help and want to help, and do whatever they can to answer questions.
Wow.
Questions?
First hand up was Joel.
I've got a few.
Uh-oh. Should we tell somebody else first? We go around, see if there's an answer all the way.
We can interrupt in between, so I'm not asking all in a row. There are 5 buildings in Jamaica that have or would be now serving food. Do we know the status on all of them as far as continuation of service? The old coffee shop, the Workhorse Cafe, the Jamaica House, 3 Mountain Inn, Karen's Business, and Astor's. Are they all current? They can all just open up with what they have?
So Karen is fine, as long as she doesn't want to increase. Or, you know, she doesn't want to change her business or grow her business. She's fine the way she is. The 3 Mountain Inn was on?
3 Mountain Inn.
So they actually just reduced their service, their food service. So they actually got moved down to a non-public water system. They were already permitted as a public water system, so I think it was up to like last year. So I don't think there would be an issue with them moving back to using their water source as a public water source.
Workhorse.
So Workhorse is not a public water system, and they can't be a public water system because they don't have the isolation distance. They are, according to the Department of Health, they are allowed to serve food without having any indoor seating.
And there's no way around their building where they could fix that.
No. We did look at that a year or so ago, and we did talk with the state about it. I think the maximum isolation distance we were able to get would be 75 feet with drilling a new well, and the state said, no, you have to get 100 feet. There's no way around it.
The old trading house, the old trading post, the old coffee shop.
That one, I don't know if they were a public water supply. I don't know if they shared.
They share the septic.
I know there's a shared septic. I didn't know if there was a shared water supply maybe with the Jamaica House. Jamaica House was permitted as a, I believe they were permitted as a public water supply at one point. I'm not sure if they were ever a transient non-community. They're non-public right now, so I'm not sure about them. If they could easily go back.
Anastas was the last one on my list.
That one is a transient non-community water system right now. It's currently inactive because it's not being used, but it is permitted as a transient non-community, so it should be able to just go back to use.
Okay.
So-
Can I go to?
Let's go around. Okay. Let's do a quick, from the select board, anybody have any questions they want to bring? Okay, the second hand up, I think, was yours.
Okay, this may be slightly
I'm just trying to share it all.
slightly premature in terms of funding, but you said that the ACS is used to determine the median income level of the town to figure out our poverty rate or whatever, our neediness. If a fire district were created, would there be a subsequent evaluation of income just from the users of a potential fire district, which would not include a lot of the surrounding?
That is a very good question, and I think Paul and I have talked about this before. There is the option to do an income survey. And so you don't even have to do a fire district to do this. So the town of Chester did it. Their water system does not serve the entire town. They only serve a small portion of the town. So for them, when they went for funding, the median household income was higher, and they were getting favorable funding awards. So they did an income survey and were actually able to show that their water service area had a lower median household income. So that is an option to do. I think it costs, this was a few years ago, I'm pretty sure it was around $10,000 to do an income survey. But it is an option to look at a smaller area within the town. And there's no guarantee that it would go down, but it could.
The conversation that we've been chewing into this for so long, and the question and the question I asked a minute ago about whether or not that includes the second homeowners and the other more affluent properties blended in with people who are perhaps serving that other community. And it's a good question, and it's a tough one to answer. Yeah. Thank you. Other questions? You're up. You're on standby. Okay. Any other questions from the back row? You're up.
Okay. Is there any data in the area for communities that have put in public water and have experienced an increase or no increase in property value and an increase or no increase in economic development?
I don't know of any who have recently.
I think there's one district down around Beachboro or something around there.
Reedsboro's had theirs for a while. I can't think of the name of the town. The town next to Reedsboro is considering a water system, but they haven't moved forward on it yet. Off the top of my head, I don't know of any, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay, great.
Was that something you ended up talking to realtors about? Was there information that provided you, so to speak, to that issue?
Yes. In looking at property values, certainly I would talk to them. I just have to find a town that has recently put in a water system.
Are any of those, are any of the systems fall under the Wyndham Regional, under their, would they have access to that kind of data?
They could.
I would,
They're advocate, they're all for
Yes.
it. So we were at the last Wyndham Regional Full Commission meeting and they were excited that you were gonna present us with your report. And offered to help any way they could, so
Yes.
maybe they would
And
have
the
some
Community
information.
Development Committee is also upgrading the report, the whole Wyndham Regional report, and that's a very strong point that they have about adding sewer and water to increase the potential of the town to grow.
I
And with-
apologize. Go ahead.
Sorry, with Chris's interest in this topic, he might have some data on this question. So I can ask him.
Joel, I forgot to ask you to identify yourself.
Yeah, Joel Blooming?
Who is also on the regional commission.
Right.
Okay. Anybody, quick, no, you're up, yeah, okay. Just want to make sure.
Yeah. I understand the preliminary contracting study costs around $100,000 to do, is that? From the meetings that I've gone to, that's.
A preliminary engineering report?
Yeah,
It really depends on what you're studying, what the area is. I mean, if you were studying Brattleboro, a new water system, let's say, for the town of Brattleboro, yeah, that would cost a lot more than a water system, than studying one for Jamaica. So it's really, it depends on scale. I would say, so one thing I did bring with me is, so there's two different parts to it. There's source exploration and the preliminary engineering report. And they really do need to go together, but they're two separate parts. So source exploration is kind of the wild card because you don't know how long it's going to take you to find a source. You don't know how many places you're going to have to look. So I actually got in touch with a hydrogeologist that we work with a lot, and he gave me a table that he's put together based on his experience. So basically this includes preliminary evaluation for groundwater availability, well site selection, obtaining regulatory approval, constructing the well, and then, so regulatory approval for constructing the well, and then getting regulatory approval to use the well. He has come up with anywhere from $45,000 to $110,000 to do just the source exploration and development. And then the preliminary engineering report, I hate to throw out numbers, but I'm gonna give you a wide range, 50 to 100.
so the total would be 100 to 200. Okay. Still?
Sure. No, okay.
Maybe it's shorter, I picked the harder ones first.
Okay.
Is there any place in the village that could dig a well anywhere at all?
I can't answer that question without a hydrogeologist.
Okay.
I can say that there are some well yields, based on the data that we did see, there are some pretty good well yields on some of the existing wells. Not sufficient for a community
I'm just
water
talking
source,
about
but there are pretty good
for
well yields.
individual wells, not community wells. Could anybody who owned a property in the village of Jamaica dig a well anyplace in the downtown area?
Let's say for a replace, like you need to
No,
replace the well, for a new well.
Just a new well.
You mean, and keep the isolation distance?
Are there any places that are not, have enough space between that area and any existing septic systems?
Within the study area, yes.
There are places.
There are places within the study area,
Where local wells could be drilled.
yes.
Can I clarify that? There are places that are out of the septic area. No indication whether drilling in that particular spot will produce a well.
Right.
So there are places to drill, but not necessarily produce a well.
Right.
Yes.
And isn't it true that the shadow area, if you put a water supply in the shadow area, it doesn't go away, it just gets cut in half, though it's not 100 feet now, it's 50 feet? Or is that not true?
You mean from a leach field to a
So if we put
water line?
If we put a water system in now, that would not eliminate the shadow area entirely, it would just reduce it.
Yes, so the shadow area meaning, so when we talk about isolation distance, we talk about distance from the well to various things.
Leach field.
Shadow area is the distance from the leach field to various things. So a leach field does need to be 50 feet away from a water main or
Right.
water service,
Right.
yes.
Whereas now it has to be 100 feet
100,
from.
yes.
Right. And just a little last question. All the contaminants that exist, including nuclear, including minerals, are they all treatable?
Everything we tested for, yes, is
Could be
treatable.
treated.
Yes.
On an individual level? On
Yes.
individual property?
It could be, yes. I mean, there's cost associated with that.
Okay, I'll think of all the rest when I'm sleeping.
Give us a call, have a conference call. Any other questions?
Yeah, so have you ever found uranium in any other studies, like this water study you've done for us?
Not in studies, but in existing water systems, yes. We've done projects to treat for uranium.
I've always heard there was
Wasn't there,
uranium
yeah,
up there.
wasn't there?
I haven't found it, we didn't find anything here, let me just,
Wasn't there a movement years ago to establish a uranium mining that the town defeated?
Well, there is some. There was some mapping, wasn't there?
I had heard about it.
Didn't we see some maps?
I had heard about those maps. I don't want to see.
The
I
uranium-
remember the Doshies had some, but they never got to me.
I'm glad to hear there wasn't any.
the uranium was
tested
all
wells.
non-detectable.
Okay, that's
There
great.
was nothing that was even detectable
You're talking about in wells
in the wells,
Right.
yes.
specifically.
So any glowing people that you see running around town are out here? Chris, this is a pretty impressive piece of work that you guys have produced. Thank you very, very much. It's pretty clear that the town has a conversation that we need to have. And it boils down to where we are going to go as a town. There are, coming to me, I'm hearing people saying, the town's fine, other people saying the town's dying. You know, and there's support for both of those positions, but not completely overwhelming support. You know, I think there's some hope. I think we've got some projects. I was talking to Alex earlier today about the idea about making things happen for the future. The clearest thing is what we're doing with the Cheney building. If we can make that, turn that into an asset, if we can more effectively use the town hall, for example. If those kinds of things are doable, then there may be a commensurate package of water. We may need to do something with water to make everything else work. Having said that, boy, it's a toss-up. It's a tough call. It's a tough call, and it's going to have to be a conversation we're going to have outside of this room with everybody, and then eventually bring it back to us. So I'm encouraging everybody who has any thoughts about this to send them to us. We'll certainly take all that into consideration, or come. Oddly enough, we meet here on a regular basis, like every other week. We'd like to hear what's going on in the community, and the ideas that many people have to push us forward may give us another perspective on whether we need to go for the water thing. But it's clearly these things got to be operated hand in glove, and it is a difference between keeping Jamaica as it is, which is okay, or moving it forward, which is okay. Some of us aren't going to be around too much longer to be the forward. So I would throw it to those of you who are younger in the community to step up with some ideas and start thinking about how you want to see Jamaica in 10 or 15 or 20 years. I know a lot of you are looking forward to me being gone, I'll work on that. But as far as other portions of the town, how we use these facilities, especially if we use the facility we already have, to then perhaps generate interest in moving things further. It's a tough call. I think we all have to have a conversation. We got good people on both sides. We just need to be civil about it and make sure we all have an opportunity to present our ideas. I think that's a very important piece of this.
So,
Sure.
my question is, do we want to have a special meeting where we go over, where we get a presentation like we did for the first meeting with the, now, here's what we're going to do, now this would be the meeting that says, here's what the results were.
Sure.
We should have done that and had you give this report.
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Go ahead.
So at the June select board meeting, you all decided to encourage a conversation to begin about land use. We were talking about very limited zoning and view corridors. So as a result of that, the planning commission has actually applied for a municipal planning grant to have exactly this conversation. What do we want Jamaica to look like in the next 20 years?
Excellent.
And obviously it's centered around land use because that's what precipitated that particular issue, but there's absolutely no reason that because we're talking about growth, we're talking about what is our vision. So I won't find out if we'll have been awarded this grant for another 2 or 3 weeks, but before we plan any forums or anything, because the work plan that we submitted for this included public forums, surveys, professional planners to come and help us have this conversation. So, and a lot of community education about what it involves.
And you're expecting to be able to do that after the first meeting?
They said by the end of November, so.
So what's the funding, just for
It's
those
another municipal
services?
planning grant, the same funding agency, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, that funded our grant to update the municipal plan. And towns that are wanting that money to do that, they get priority. But we didn't get one in 2018, it wasn't applied for. So this is for FY 2019. And as a result of the decision in June to have this conversation, we wrote the grant for that, so.
So, thoughts, anybody?
I just want to thank you for, not, in my perspective of your report was, it wasn't slanted like to benefit your company or, no, really. That was very, it wasn't biased and it wasn't, gloom and doom, or you better do this or you better do that. I just very hopeful.
Information.
There's a lot of good information there and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would you be, dovetailing back on Becca's thing, would you be open to attending a public forum if we were to set up something like that in conjunction with what Rebecca's talking about? I'm guessing after the first of the year, because once we hit December, everybody's gonna be, flat out for Christmas.
And then the question is, do we wait till town meeting?
Well, I'm thinking,
And we want to do it before time.
you're thinking in the same direction. If we did something like in January, we would still have time. Do you remember what the cutoff date is for the town report?
45 days, I think.
I'm not sure when we have to have all that stuff prepared. But at least in January, it gives us an opportunity to get some sense of where we want to go and then decide whether we want to bring it to the town, Lou, do you remember what the cutoff is?
I think the warrant has to be voted on by the select board by the end of January or somewhere in that.
Okay, so early January.
45 days, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right to me, but I can't remember the exact date. That way we could get, put a group, put a presentation together and bring it to everybody. And then at that point, decide whether we're going to, write put something on the town. If it's just for a discussion, we may not have to vote on anything, but again, to bring it to everybody. We always have the issue of who can make it to these meetings. And there's, a group of people can make it in the days and some can make it at night. Town meeting day gets a pretty good sized group of people. But if we could get in early January, this gathering with your sources, put it in front of the entire community, and then at that point decide whether or not we want to move into something for the town meeting in March. Does that make sense to everybody?
But Under our contract with you, have you fulfilled the contract for the amount that you were contracted for?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be, something to
Got here,
consider
extra
too.
expense.
Yeah,
Send us
And
a-
if you wanted to do that, I mean, I can provide you with a cost to do a presentation,
Okay.
in conjunction with what Rebecca's talking
If we
about.
could get that, we see that, there seems to be a consensus, that seems like a good idea. Could you get me that? Give me the cost, tell me what it's gonna be.
Okay, in line with the last point that Rebecca made, which was about education, there are a lot of resources and people who would come to our meeting, whatever meeting that was, that wouldn't cost anything. Agencies like federal,
Rural development.
oh,
sure.
yeah, water, A&R. There are people in all those groups that have experience on these things and information. If we just have a meeting where people who want water and people who don't want water are fighting each other without any information, it won't get us further. But if we have people who can provide good information on both sides of the story about how it can help us, that would be important enough for the local people to be able to make intelligent decisions.
Clearly, before we make the decisions, you're right, we're still trying to get out of the parking lot.
Well, that's not going to happen in the town meeting.
No, but I like the idea.
I can help make some connections with some people at USDA, at the state, at ECCD, at Wyndham Regional. I mean, obviously we have Wyndham Regional connections, but I can help make some connections of people who would be interested in helping out and participating in a public forum.
Can you?
And if we do get this grant, which would probably be around $8,000, that some of that money could be used to fund.
Sure.
Speaking, I mean, that's what it's really all about, and having professional planners and people to help us hold this very difficult conversation.
Would the planning commission be amenable to hunching that project? To setting it up and gathering the people together?
We kind of already committed to that.
That's what I was saying. But I think that might be something that we could all benefit from. And you are already partially up to, well, not armpit deep like he is, but at least waist deep in this issue. And I think if you could kind of put that together and coordinate with her sources and your sources, and make a presentation for the community over in the town hall, sometime early January, perhaps after the holidays, something like that.
I will definitely know then whether or not we have the money to do
I'm
that.
hoping.
If we have a 2 out of 3 chance, apparently, according to my sources. Always communities are applying for grants that, there are more communities that want money than the state has to get. They have a limited pot. And obviously communities that are updating their plan get first priority, which is what happened to us 2 years ago when we did our plan. But this seemed like a really good conversation to have, and I thought it was worth a shot to
Absolutely
grant
agree.
for it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think everybody in the community needs to be talking amongst themselves about pros and cons. No fighting, just talking. And get all that conversation started before we get to these meetings so they have questions and issues to bring up. Excellent. Thank you very much. This is an excellent product. I really appreciate it. Those of you guys that had a chance to review the whole thing, it's fairly, I don't want to say it's long, it's what, 25 pages of numbers, dots and little things. But it's, they're taking small bites. I mean, I took 2 or 3 days to read it, but it's got a huge amount of information. We really appreciate it. You guys did a great job, and of course the right answer is, I don't know. Which is the exact right answer. It depends on where we as a community want to go. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Excellent.
And if anybody has questions after today, feel free to contact me.
Sure. Good. Excellent. The next item we want to talk about is an item that Lou wants to bring to us. I would like to request the group take about a 5-minute break. Do we do that? And we convene at 8:35? On the chair. All in favor, say aye on the chair. Thank you. We'll extend the recess for 5 minutes. It'll be 8. All right, we're reconvening the Jamaica Selectboard for Monday, November the 12th. Our next item on the agenda is a discussion of a change in policy for updating the property assessment model. and including the purchase of relevant computer hardware, and Lou
Okay.
Russo, who is going to make the presentation to us. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
You're up.
I am Lou Russo, Chair of the Board of Listers, for those of you who are watching. What I really want to do is to introduce this topic. This is really a budget item, and I'd like to, when we have our listers budget, I want to discuss this in much more detail. But the reason I want to bring it up is because I think it's a policy change, and I think it ought to be brought up on television so the rest of the town can be aware of it. And if anybody has any thoughts, they can discuss it with me, or they can discuss it with you, or they can come to the budget meeting. As you know, we went through a townwide reappraisal, and we have created a model, and most of you, all four of you, in fact, were on the BCA and heard our presentation there, and you've become familiar with the appraisal process a little bit more than you were before. What happened is 10 years ago or 12 years ago, there was a model as well created. The problem is that over those 10 years, that model became stale. And the reason it became stale was because the market changed, the properties themselves changed, and what happened is during the course of those 10 years, people applied for grievances, and a lot of those grievances were accepted. And every time a grievance is accepted, it puts a distortion in the model. And eventually our COD got out of whack. We were forced by the state to reappraise. That's not the best way to appraise properties in the town. The best way is to try to stay current with the market, try to stay current with sales that have taken place and the like. I introduced this topic a little while back, which is the idea of doing a much more frequent townwide reappraisal and to try to stay current. Part of the problem with the last model is that the person who created that model then went away and wasn't even involved in reappraisals anymore. And therefore, when we created the new model, we had to go and revisit every single home again. And a lot of people said to us, well, why did you do that? We haven't changed our property in 10 years. Well, the problem is that the new appraisal company couldn't rely on data collected by somebody 10 or 12 years ago. So the idea is that we've been talking about within the listers is to try to do a reappraisal every 5 years, but to keep things moving currently rather than just doing a snapshot periodically. I've created a little paper here for your reading pleasure. I don't want to go over the whole paper, but I just want to go over a few points with you. If you pass that along. And we'll discuss this in more detail when we get time at our budget meeting. A statistical reappraisal can be done at any time. It doesn't have to be done when the COD gets out of proportion. A lot of towns do it much more frequently. However, in order to do a statistical reappraisal based on sales, you have to keep your data current. So I talked with the appraisal company that we currently use, which is New England Municipal Consultants, and they have a 5-year proposal that they gave to me that they would do data collection on 1/4 of the town every year, and then in the 5th year they would do a statistical reappraisal based on the sales of the previous three years. What that would do is it would reduce the distortions. We would never be out of whack with our COD. We would never be forced by the state to do a townwide reappraisal. We would be kept much more current over time. The question is, what is the cost? The cost is, over 5 years, about $95,000. What I did in that sheet is I projected what a townwide reappraisal might cost in 10 years, which I think was about $160,000 or so, or $170,000, I think. So the cost of doing a 5-year plan in today's dollars every 5 years would be over a 10-year period of about $190,000 versus about $160,000 if it were just done at the 10-year point. Currently, the state gives us money every year based on the number of properties we have to do the reappraisal. The state gives us $11,000 $144 last year, and every year, presumably that number goes up a little bit. In our budget, in our current budget, we have allocated $5,000 to be put into the reappraisal reserve account. So approximately $16,144 is put into the reserve account every year leading up to that, either any reappraisal we want to do, any reappraisal services that we have. In order to do the 5-year plan that I've outlined here, it would be an additional $2,000 per year. When I get to the budget at our budget meeting, you'll see that my request is going to be to increase the amount that gets put into the townwide reappraisal by about $2,000. The reason we think it's important is because of fairness. Number one, people got smacked with huge increases between the reappraisal 10 years ago and this one. Part of the reason was because the market changed significantly in that time frame. Part of the reason was because we noted that the cost or the property values for the land went down, but the value of the buildings went up because the construction costs are higher now than they were 10 years ago. So what happened is the properties that were more expensive in cost got whacked a lot harder than the cost of properties which were less expensive in town. And in order to prevent that kind of distortion every 10 years, we think it's better to do this periodically, to keep the same company doing it so that the data doesn't have to be redone every time and the like. And the other part of it is because of grievances and anything else that affects the value of towns, anytime a property value goes down, in essence, the rest of the town has to make up for that. So over time, the more grievances that get heard and get granted, the more everybody else's cost, in their tax rate goes up. So anyways, I would like to bring that up at our next budget meeting, at your first budget meeting, if possible. But if you, in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind reading that paper that I just gave you, that would be useful. Okay, and the other topic.
Before we leave this, quick question. Do you have a contract with the agency we're working with right now?
We do not. Our contract has been completed.
It's been completed.
We have a verbal contract with them to do maintenance, if you will. What we've done is we don't feel qualified to evaluate a new home. We don't feel qualified to evaluate an addition. We do feel qualified as listers to go out and measure sheds and measure things, but really not to make remember we talked about the grading ability? We think that should be left to the professional. So we have a contract with them, a verbal contract right now, to do about 2 or 3 days of field work every year for properties that are new buildings that have been built or additions that have been put on.
How, will that be a conflict with this?
No, we would still maintain that. The other part is that they do our annual rollover. It's called our annual rollover. We roll over from one year to the next. And they do, we also have a support agreement with them, which is about $3,500. And you'll see that in the budget when I present that to you at the budget meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the other thing that we're thinking about is the listers try to go out in the field to look at homes periodically, to look and see, especially if there's new construction going on, new additions being put on, sheds that are being added and things like that. The problem is when we get out there, we don't remember all these different properties and what they actually used to be. So we take notes, we come back to the office, and we go back and look at their lister cards, and we say, oh yeah, that shed was there last year, or that addition was already on, or whatever. What we'd like to do is to purchase a new computer. The new computer would be a Microsoft Surface. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but what that is it's actually a computer and a tablet. Most tablets, like the Apple product, I forget what it's called, the iPad, or other tablets, aren't really full computers. The one thing about a Microsoft Surface is it is a full computer. It uses an Intel processor, has the same instruction set as Windows 10. Windows 10 runs on it, and I use it myself. I have a Surface, and I can run any program that I can run on a desktop. I can run it on a Surface. So it's a real computer, but it's also a tablet. We can take it in the field with us, and we can actually put the database, our database online, so when we go to a property, we can bring up that lister card, and we can see exactly what's on there now, and we can, then be able to tell whether something new has been added. So we're interested in that. The side benefit would be is that we would take one of our two computers. We have two computers that are designed, that are better quality computers, intended for using in the mapping program to do actually real mapping using ArcGIS software. There's been some interest in the Planning Commission to using that ArcGIS program. Unfortunately, it wasn't available on a very timely way, but we would take one of those computers and move it into the public or the town clerk area, which would, number one, be available to any group in town who wanted to use the ArcMap software. And the reason we actually purchased a concurrent license for ArcMap is just for this reason, so others could use it as well. But the other use for this computer would be as a computer for lawyers to be able to do research on our town records. I know Pam, before she left, asked me to make a computer available for that purpose. We have a little old computer I tried to make work, but it was working using Windows 8 and we just couldn't make it work. So anyway, this computer would be moved into the town clerk's office to be used for anybody who's doing town business that's not got a normal computer, whether it be on the Planning Commission, whether it be from the Historical Foundation or the Recreation Committee, anybody who had legitimate town business. This computer would not be tied into the server that we use. They wouldn't be able to access any information that we have that's for the town offices or for the lister's office. But anyways, so what we're asking for is a new computer for the listers, move one of our old computers into the town clerk's office to be used as a public computer.
Approximate cost.
I got that right here. A normal desktop computer is about in the $800 range. If it's a little bit more souped up for high-end stuff, the Microsoft Surface is about $1,388, I've estimated. Now, a Surface, unlike our desktop computer, a Surface only has one USB port. So you usually generally have to buy a docking station, which has 3 USB ports. And I've discovered that USB 3 works very well off the docking station. USB 2 does not. So I would ask for a USB 2 hub, which is connected by there seems to be some kind of interference between the two. So by taking the USB 2 hub and putting it about 3 feet away, solves the issue with any USB 2 device like a wireless mouse and whatever. And there's the one thing I did ask or added in there is the extended warranty. The extended warranty covers accidental damage, and my Surface has a broken glass because it accidentally fell.
Is that a 1 year or 3 year warranty?
It's a 3 year.
It's a
3-year warranty, right. It's a 3-year, it's extended warranty with accidental protection. In my case, it doesn't really matter. I can still use it, but for the town's purposes, I prefer to have the accidental insurance. So that's my request.
I noticed you've got a wireless keyboard and then wireless mouse / keyboard.
Where do you see? Oh, okay. The wireless keyboard is, it's actually a protection. It actually connects via a magnetic surface to the actual surface, and when it closes up, it serves as a portable keyboard. So when you're taking it out in the field, you can open it up and you actually have a little keyboard. But that's not what you want to use when you're on your desk. So instead, you have the wireless mouse for when you're using it as a desktop computer.
Isn't there a on-screen keyboard for that?
Yes, absolutely. Depends on actually how much data entry you're using. If you're doing significant data entry, you're much better off with the.
But in the field, you'll just be adding notes.
Probably that's true, but it does serve as a protection for when you're, it does close up.
You're gonna present this in budget as well.
Pardon me?
You will present this in budget time as well.
No, I'm looking for this now.
Doing this now.
Oh, and let me talk about the payment of this. The way we've got the computer hardware set up is part of our reserve account called Office Hardware Reserve Account. And we have about 24,000 in that office service. We've used that in the past to buy all of our computers. When we bought computers for the town clerk and treasurer, we took it out of that reserve account. When we bought new computers for the listers, we took it out of that reserve account. When we buy a new printer or a new copier, I know Terry and Sarah are looking potentially to get a new copier soon. That will come out of that reserve account.
So you're not talking then about coming out of the lister's account, you're talking about coming out of the account.
I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that, yes. Coming out of the reserve account for office equipment. Right, and as I said, there's 24,000 in that account right now. I think you put $2,000 in every year.
Questions?
Do we have to decide right now?
Well, I didn't realize this was a tonight decision, that you want it tonight.
You can wait and think about it and decide at the next
I'd
meeting.
like to think about it.
Yeah.
We are looking to do this before July of next year, which is when any budgetary request
Sure.
would come in.
This gives us time to think about this, because you're not going to go out and lose much in the winter anyway.
No, the time we are out in the community most will be in the March, April timeframe, because that's when all of our properties need to be evaluated around April 1st. That's the date when all of our properties.
Okay. So this would give us time to at least look at where the budget, our budget's going to go, what we've got on hand to work with, and give us time to think about this in the back of our minds, and then get back to you with an answer on that.
As I said, there is no budgetary impact. It's really not a reserve account.
All right, any further questions? Thank you very much, Lou.
Okay.
Any questions, anybody? So what we'll do is we'll table this pending a review of how our budget's going. As we don't have to wait for the final budget, but at least get a sense of where we are in the budget.
The reserve account.
Yeah.
He just presented that to us, we really aren't tabling anything, we're just looking under advisement.
Well, that's true, yeah, we're not table, so you're under the table, instead of on the table,
Okay.
where I stand. But it's good to give us some time to look at that. Thank you very much, Lou.
Okay, you're welcome.
Back and see us anytime. The last item on the budget is, on the
Docket.
agenda.
It's getting all messed up.
That's it? Yeah, I've got about 5 more minutes of brain power left, let's try it. We have a discussion concerning the discussion, continuing the discussion of e-waste containers at the transfer station. Judy sent us all a letter discussing this. She brought us some information, some of which was new, some of which has been discussed before. Greg's been involved with this quite a bit. Greg, do you want to speak to the new parts of this information? You had a chance to review it?
I have, maybe that's because I've been in it so much that nothing jumped out at
That's
me
true.
as being too new. So,
All right, let me hit the new parts then.
Okay, if you've got a
Yeah.
thought of what those are.
If you look on the first page, in the possibilities, under B, because she's discussed most of this, we've all been over this multiple times.
Okay,
Under B, she has, she looked at the possibility of different new metal containers. And it's paragraph B, new metal containers. These 3 companies were contacted inquiring about the possibility of replacing one of the existing containers. The Door Company, or Door.
I think it's DOR.
I thought it was the DOR myself, but I wasn't sure. Anyway, Manchester, Vermont, and then the Outback Storage in Keene and the Pack Van in South Road. The Door Company, they're reporting that they only rent the 8-foot by 40 containers at $100 a month. The container that is delivered on site is leak-proof and in good shape, and it was replaced, and there's some directions on how to place it. The third is the Outback, was number 2. Oh, that was the door company. Paragraph number 3 says the Outback storage, they only sell the 8-foot by 40-foot containers made of steel. And they have 3 types, rebuilt, painted, some that are not painted, some that are brand new. For the least expensive, which is the non-painted used, the cost is $3,475 with a delivery charge of $800.
Yep, I guess I had previously commented on cost that more in the $2,500 range, and it turns out that trying to find a good quality used container, there are such things as at $2,500, but they're just hard to track down. Most of the ones that some of the bigger dealers are dealing with are obviously more expensive.
Okay, well, and that's what she's coming up with, because before the pack van, they call it cargo worthy and watertight. I think that means if you were gonna send something across the ocean, the cost is $39.40 with a delivery charge of $350. And then she talks about the separate wooden structure, which she's discussed with us in the past.
And I'm thinking that there's hundreds of these things that you can find online for used storage things, but it is a lot to track them down, and then you've got the cost of delivery and setup and whatnot.
It gets up around $4,000 a piece, doesn't it?
I still in my heart think that you can, not in my heart, but I mean, just from preliminary looking around, that there's probably some less expensive ones, but they're for the finding them and the ease of tracking one down.
Sure.
And then getting delivered.
And getting it delivered, yeah.
And wherever.
Yeah, and I will like to comment a little bit, obviously there's the 2 units that are there now that are in both, not dire need, but in need of some work. She had said that the cost is unknown. They both need work done either to install a door or to make the existing door on the one a little bit more watertight.
Mm-hmm.
They both are not properly set on the ground, meaning that they're moist on the bottom all the time and they're starting to rust out. So Judy speaks to that they're going to continue to get worse. But I think some cost on those, probably combined $1,000 to do the repairs on the existing units, but they're going to still have a long-term need for continuous upgrades. I mean, that would be the cost of installing doors on the one unit, putting another subfloor down in the second unit, some carpentry work and a little bit of welding to put a door on the wall.
The other thing that's not mentioned on this paper, do you know or have any sense of the cost, of the usability of the containers that are down at the
Like disposal, that's my question, what about?
They are somewhat in the same condition, meaning they're not in perfect shape. They would probably require some work also. I haven't gone to evaluate them to know if they need a door, don't need a door, how the
I know one's
floor
got a
is.
door, but I don't even know if it's how. I do know that Dan's he's tightening up the grate. He's
Right.
gonna put the board up, so that'll make that waterproof in the immediate.
Right, and that was causing some problems no matter what. I mean, it was getting wet inside of there, and it does have plywood floor, so the thought on that was it was a fairly minor expense to buy a sheet of plywood, and that whatever our outcome of the solution here was, is that would enhance that unit for the composting or whatever.
Yeah,
is stored there.
that's one of my questions, that it doesn't include any disposal of are we just gonna throw them down at the town garage? Are we gonna try to repurpose them for other things, or do we have to actually dispose of them and that's gonna be another grand to get rid of it?
I think our thinking was that they would stay there and they would still have the secondary use of having the organics in one of them and having the tires and any other
Okay,
covered
sure,
storage
okay.
that you
Yeah,
need.
I remember that now, yeah.
There's always a need, I think, for covered storage. It just wouldn't be secure or waterproof. But
Okay.
You can't like weld plates into those
I
floors?
believe you can. And there's also discussion of not using the full unit. The existing wooden structure from Jamaica Cottage Shop, as the estimate here, would be at only, trying to remember now, it'd be 20 feet. The existing ones are 40 feet, so even if you used only half of one of those units, because most of the rusted out portion of the unit is in the back.
Right.
And we had spoken with the person from the state about not storing stuff in the back. And the moisture that's getting in there is coming in from the front. So they're half usable, so to speak. So to your point, I think if you, you wouldn't even have to put a new metal grate down because you just wouldn't use the portion in the back where they're rusted out.
We have Hal at our disposal. You know, the guy that works on, does our welding and Coleman.
Oh, yeah.
He might be able to fix those floors and then put a wooden deck on. I don't know, I looked at them, I can go in there with a flashlight or anything, but.
The wooden deck isn't optimal either,
Right.
because of cleanup potential. If something does get broken on it, either metal or concrete slab would be a better surface.
No, I'm not, I wouldn't want that. I'm
So you
just
wouldn't
saying.
want to put the.
That I thought she was they were after, you know, patching it up and then maybe putting a deck on it.
I think the deck the one that has a metal, has a wooden deck in it now, needs some work done to the wood. And my only guess is just like in an old house, there's a reason they put a wooden deck in there, is probably because there was already holes in the metal underneath it. But a wooden deck is not optimal for either moving the containers or for possible or necessary cleanup. So a hard surface is better.
But it does sound like there are options that we haven't fully explored.
I mean, I guess I had looked at, in partnership with Judy, was looking at just putting doors on the front of them.
Yeah.
And not doing anything with actual welding, other than welding a plate to attach the door
In
to.
the door. Let's talk, on the front, of the first paragraph, she mentions that the state has given us more time to do these things.
They obviously want this to work, they don't wanna throw us out on the street on this program.
They're very much
So
willing to
they're-
work with us.
they know that we're making efforts to find a solution.
Yeah.
And the transfer station is in no danger of being closed down.
Correct.
Right.
There was some false information that went out on the Jamaica Facebook page. It was totally inaccurate about
Correct.
this
Yes.
situation.
We're not losing the transfer station.
Yeah,
I'm just saying to the
Yeah,
public.
exactly.
and everything else
That was
is in
inaccurate.
full compliance. It's just that this needed to basically tighten up from the precipitation side of things was the real issue on these
Should
units.
we move forward with trying to tighten this up and see how that works? I'm inclined to think that's buying a new building seems to be the least cost-effective way of going about doing these things at this point.
Yeah, I think there could, whatever is done on these existing ones has the long-term benefit of being beneficial for that unit, whatever's stored in there. And
Gotcha.
if it doesn't satisfy the requirements for the electronics and we end up going to another unit, I personally, being a more fiscally conservative person, would like to look at these less expensive options, but also to look at, I'm not denying that there's some maintenance costs and things that need to be done at the transfer station, so whether it's a new facility for one particular recycling or even work done on what's up there now, that should be looked at and budgeted for. That I would opt for the less expensive options as a general rule.
I believe, in fairness to Judy, because she's not here, she's really the champion of this, that
Right.
we should defer till she returns before we make any
We can
decisions, because I think she should get a voice in this.
And she has an opinion on this in the last paragraph.
She does.
Yeah. Right, but
I would concur with that. I would also like to recommend though, and we can vote or not vote on, to make a motion that we do some, I'm gonna use the word minor, but get some very specific estimates to doing some upgrades on the existing units, and that there's no negative side to that,
I think that's
even if we
reasonable.
proceed
Yeah.
to another.
We could do that.
And then possibly, at least get the estimates for the next meeting too. Because here she said a charge unknown, but if we had somebody come in, what would it really cost to weld this?
That's a good idea. And we've got a contract, with Coleman, that way for the welding of the,
He does a lot for us.
so he's like I think that's a good
He's
reason.
repaired the compactor, he does things in the garage.
Yeah,
Quite a bit.
We've done a lot of work with him. I think that'd be reasonable.
Yeah, I think
You know, if it goes to the point where we're looking at a lot of money, then we have to go out to bid and that sort of stuff. But I think right now, it makes sense to get a good sense of what it would, to take to fix it. We've spent a lot of time focusing on making something new or getting something, but let's talk about what it's gonna
And the
take
other-
to fix this.
What we're at right now, Karen at the state has given us an extension. I mean, there's no definition to that, but we are taking steps. Currently, the electronic recyclables are in the same unit where the organics are. They are separated, they're on opposite sides. It's not an optimal thing. One of the main issues in there though was that water was still coming in through the front of the door, and Dan has already gotten a piece of plywood to fix that, so that's taken a great step toward what the issues were with moisture coming into the front of the building.
To go over that screen, it's like a great.
Yeah, good way, and that's what we're talking about. No, I think that's a good idea, so that takes the immediacy out of it, and I too have had conversations, they're very, very receptive to our dilemma and our progress to fixing it, so I think we're okay. And there is, as you mentioned, there is no deadline as such.
Right.
They certainly would like it done in 30 days, but that may not happen in 30 days. We can do the best we can with what we've got. And then we can have this discussion again when Judy's back.
Mhm.
Do we need to vote?
There really isn't a motion on the table as such.
But do we need to put a motion to research this, or?
Let's do that, because we're gonna have to
I'll put a
spend some
motion
money.
that we research the costs of repairing the current containers for the electronics.
Yeah, second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, ayes have it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Who's gonna do that?
Who's gonna do what?
Who's gonna look into the?
I'm sorry, we shouldn't have mentioned that, but I was thinking in terms of the existing team. Is that something you'd look
I think
into?
Greg would do it as part of the.
I'll stop in, okay?
That's all.
Yeah,
Contacts for
I
the,
don't think we need to.
How?
yeah. Tara's had all that information.
Yeah, okay.
He builds those on a regular basis. Apparently we break things apparently during the winter and trucks and stuff.
Okay,
So we have had an interruption, but all in favor say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes, and Greg, we can come in one of these days, we'll get the information from Terry.
Yep.
And move on that one. Excellent. So now I just lose my agenda. And the answer is, time for public concerns. I think we've exhausted our public, because most of them left. I'm sorry.
I'll make a motion to adjourn then.
I have a motion to adjourn, do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, we stand adjourned at 9:07.
Second,
Yeah.
Yeah. 9:07.